In September of 2023, a small boat sat in open water south of Isle Royale, 750 feet of Lake Superior underneath it, and two men in their 60s watched a screen the way other men watch a heart monitor. Jerry Eliasson was at the helm. Ken Merriman was below, eyes on the sonar feed. They had been looking for the Henry Steinbrenner for 9 years. The freighter went down in a November storm in 1953, and for 9 years the lake had kept the exact location to itself, through failed searches, through years when the two men simply stopped and came back later with better equipment. On this pass, the screen changed. Merriman came up the ladder and said the words he had said a dozen times before over 4 decades of doing exactly this. There it is. The Steinbrenner was real. It was down there, upright in the dark, and now it had been found. The ship had gone down in a storm in 1953 with a jammed hatch, and wind reported as high as 70 knots, taking 17 of the 18 men aboard with it, and for 9 years its exact resting place had been one more line item on a long list of things the two men intended to solve before they were done. They had tried before and failed, more than once, misreading the terrain, chasing shapes on the sonar screen that turned out to be nothing but the natural roll of the lake bed, littered in places with scattered iron ore pellets that scrambled the returns and made every search a guessing game played at 750 feet of depth. That is what a Lake Superior mystery looks like when it finally gets solved. A screen, a shape, a return that, after enough failed passes to know the difference, finally matches the outline of a hull. What is harder to explain is what happens when the screen shows something that does not match the outline of anything. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Eliasson, Merriman, and their longtime partner Craig Smith are not scientists by trade. Eliasson spent his career with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. Merriman is a computer engineer who runs a dive charter out of the Twin Cities in his off hours. Smith is a company financial officer from Rice Lake, Wisconsin. What they share is water time, and an unusual amount of it. Eliasson made his first dive in Lake Superior in 1968, in a wetsuit with no hood, no boots, and no gloves, because that was what a person had in 1968. He has since logged more than 700 wreck dives. In collaboration with Merriman Smith and a rotating crew that has included Merriman's own son, the team has been credited with more than a dozen major shipwreck discoveries going back to the 1970s, including vessels that had been missing for the better part of a century. Eliasson has estimated that Lake Superior holds something close to 400 shipwrecks. Roughly 100 have been found. That leaves 300 hulls sitting somewhere in 3,000 square miles of cold water, undiscovered, unphotographed, and in most cases unnamed even in the historical record. Some of what is down there does not decompose the way it should. The SS Kamloops went down off Isle Royale in a December storm in 1927 with all 20 crew aboard, and when divers finally reached the wreck decades later, the engine room held a body preserved by the cold to a degree that unsettled experienced wreck divers who thought they had seen everything a shipwreck could show them. This is not folklore dressed up as science. It is the other way around. Lake Superior's water hovers in the 30s and 40s Fahrenheit, at depth year-round, cold enough that the bacteria responsible for the bloating and gas production that normally floats a drowned body simply cannot function. Instead, in a slow chemical process called saponification, body fat converts into a waxy substance called adipocere, and remains that would surface within days in a warmer lake can stay on the bottom, largely intact, for decades. Researchers studying decomposition rates have confirmed the mechanism using the same chemistry that governs food preservation and embalming. It is why the saying Lake Superior never gives up her dead survived past the point where it should have become just a lyric in a Gordon Lightfoot song. It is a measurable property of the water. The Edmund Fitzgerald is the case that made the saying famous, and it remains, in its own way, unresolved. The 729-foot freighter left Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with taconite pellets on a run toward Detroit, and ran into a November gale on Lake Superior with sustained winds that other captains on the water that night described as some of the worst they had encountered, waves reported at 12 to 16 feet and building. Radio contact with a nearby freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, continued through the evening of November 10th, 1975, right up until it did not. No distress call was ever received. The ship simply stopped answering. It now rests in two pieces, 530 feet down, roughly 170 feet apart, split with a violence that still shapes how naval architects study following sea structural failure on ore carriers. The wreck has been visited more times than almost any other site in the lake. The Navy's unmanned curve vehicle photographed it within a year of the sinking. Jacques Cousteau's son led a diving expedition to the site in 1980. Further surveys followed in the late 1980s and again in the mid-90s, when the ship's bell was recovered in a joint expedition with the Great Lakes Shipwreck Historical Society and replaced with a memorial bell engraved with the names of all 29 men who died that night. In all of that documented, repeated, camera-verified access to the wreck, not one body has ever been recovered or, by official account, even directly filmed. The cold that preserved the Kamloops sailor kept the Fitzgerald's crew from the surface entirely. 29 men went down in a storm that people on shore, on both the American and Canadian sides of the lake, watched arrive, and the lake has not given a single one of them back. What the wreck hunters and the decomposition researchers have in common is that their mysteries are documented, dated, and verifiable, even when they remain unsolved. The same cannot yet be said for a stranger claim that has circulated online for more than a decade concerning a stretch of lake floor just a few miles from where Eliasson and Merriman have spent so much of their working lives. Sometime in the years after Google Earth made high-resolution satellite and bathymetric overlays available to anyone with a browser, an amateur researcher poring over public depth charts north of Isle Royale, in the water between the island's northern shore and the Canadian border, identified what he described as an oblong walled structure sitting roughly 500 feet down. By his reading of the contour lines, the feature ran nearly 3 miles at its longest point and close to 2 miles across, with what appeared to be a consistent raised rim, estimated at around 250 feet high, and a gap on one side wide enough to resemble an opening. He published his findings under the title Disclosed the Lake Superior Anomaly, floated explanations ranging from a buried meteor impact to a submerged harbor to, at the speculative end, a structure worthy of comparison to Plato's description of Atlantis. In the years since, no professional survey team, university department, or federal agency has gone out and run a dedicated multi-beam sonar pass over that specific patch of lake floor to settle the question either way. That gap is worth sitting with, because it is not evidence of a cover-up. It is evidence of how little of Lake Superior's bottom has actually been examined at high resolution. The lake covers roughly 31,000 square miles. Detailed multi-beam bathymetric surveys, the kind of instrument work that can resolve a real wall from a trick of contour interpolation, are expensive, slow, and typically funded for specific research questions rather than open-ended searches for anomalies reported on a blog. The claim about the shape north of Isle Royale rests on publicly available bathymetric charts and satellite imagery interpreted by one person without marine science training, not on ship-based sonar data collected for that purpose. That distinction matters. A contour map built from widely spaced depth soundings can produce shapes that look sharp and geometric on a screen and turn out, on closer inspection with denser data, to be smoothed artifacts of how the software connected the dots. Geologists who have studied Lake Superior's floor in detail have found plenty of genuinely strange shapes down there. None of them, so far, have needed Atlantis to explain them. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Consider what has actually been found and confirmed with real instruments. In 2012, a University of Minnesota graduate student named Daniel Gustafson working under advisors Nigel Watrous and John Swenson, published a thesis built on high-resolution multi-beam bathymetry and seismic reflection data collected across the Thunder Bay Trough in western Lake Superior. The survey revealed dozens of irregular ring-shaped depressions on the lake floor, typically 200 to 300 meters across, cut by troughs 10 to 30 meters wide and as much as 5 meters deep. Some of the rings stood alone, others chained together into networks that, in a bathymetric image, look almost deliberate, almost built. Gustafson's data showed they were not built at all. They were dewatering structures, formed when fluid trapped in glacial and post-glacial lake sediment was expelled as the last ice sheet retreated from the basin, roughly at the time meltwater from the ancient glacial Lake Agassiz drained eastward directly into the Superior Basin. The rings are real. They are documented with actual survey instruments, dated to a specific event in the glacial retreat, and explained by a known physical process. They are also, if you did not know their history, exactly the kind of feature that could be mistaken on a satellite photo for the walls of something built rather than something formed. There is a useful comparison, just one lake over, and it shows exactly what it looks like when a claim like this one gets taken seriously and tested. In the early 2000s, an archaeologist named John O'Shea at the University of Michigan was studying a bathymetric map of Lake Huron and noticed a long, shallow ridge running underwater between Alpena, Michigan and Amberley, Ontario, a formation that had been dry land as recently as 9,000 years ago, before rising water swallowed it. O'Shea did not publish a blog post and move on. He took a boat out and ran side-scan sonar over the ridge in long, methodical lines, hour after hour, looking for anything that broke the pattern of natural lakebed. Something did. Stone alignments that did not match any natural process turned up on the sonar returns, and O'Shea's team followed with a remotely operated vehicle and scuba-trained archaeologists to get eyes and hands on the site itself. Under 121 feet of water, they found what came to be called the Drop 45 drive lane, two parallel lines of stones funneling toward a natural rock formation, built by hand, along with V-shaped stone hunting blinds positioned on the high ground above it. Divers recovered 11 flakes of chert, the telltale waste left behind when a person sharpens or repairs a stone tool. The site was radiocarbon contextualized to roughly 9,000 years old, and published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2014. More than 60 separate stone structures have since been documented along the same ridge. A hunch based on a bathymetric map became a confirmed, dated, peer-reviewed archaeological site, because someone with the right instruments went and checked. That is the process the Lake Superior claim has never gone through. Nobody is arguing it cannot be checked. Nobody has checked it yet. This is the honest complication in the North Shore claim. The bedrock beneath Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula is genuinely unusual. It is made of resistant lava flows laid down during the mid-continent rift, an ancient failed attempt by the North American continent to split apart more than 1 billion years ago, and those hardened lava ridges are exactly why Isle Royale stands above the water at all, while softer rock around it eroded down into the lake basin. A ridge of that resistant rock, running underwater in a long, straight line north of the island, would not be evidence of construction. It would be evidence of geology doing what this particular geology has always done, forming long, straight ridges out of lava that refuse to wear away as fast as everything around it. Add a glacial trough carved along the edge of that ridge, and a person looking at a coarse depth contour map, rather than an actual sonar image, could plausibly read the combination as a wall with an opening in it. None of this proves the claim is nothing. It means the claim has never been tested against the kind of data that would actually prove or disprove it, and that until someone runs a real survey, both possibilities, ordinary geology and something stranger, remain technically open. What is not in question in that same stretch of water is that people were doing extraordinary things there long before anyone had a name for Atlantis or a boat with sonar on it. The cove closest to the claimed anomaly, Macargo Cove on the north side of Isle Royale, sits inside the Minong mining district, where researchers have documented more than 1,000 individual mining pits dug by hand into copper-bearing rock. In 2015, a research team led by David Pompiani analyzed sediment cores pulled from the bottom of Macargo Cove and found metal pollution consistent with active copper mining dating back 6,500 to 5,400 years. That is older than the pyramids of Giza. The pits were first confirmed as human-made, rather than a natural mineral formation, in an 1850 excavation report by geologists John Foster and Josiah Whitney, and the district was mapped in detail by Michigan's state geologist Charles Whittlesey in 1862. The Minong Mining District was designated a National Historic Landmark, with the nomination authored by Dr. Daniel Trapal of Michigan Technological University, in recognition of just how much of what is known today about ancient copper working across the entire Great Lakes region came from studying this one stretch of island shoreline. The pits themselves are not subtle. Some held copper masses too large for one person to move, including a single nugget later recorded at more than 4,000 pounds. Worked loose from the surrounding rock using stone hammers, fire, and cold water poured over heated stone to crack it, methods reconstructed by 19th century geologists, standing in the same pits, and later confirmed by archaeologists working the site in the 20th and 21st centuries. People were pulling raw copper out of the rock at Isle Royale for something close to 4,500 years before Europeans ever charted the lake, using techniques sophisticated enough that the copper they produced has turned up in trade sites hundreds of miles away. Nobody suppressed that. It sat there, in plain sight, in a National Historic Landmark, with a visitor trail running past it, waiting for a sediment core and a mass spectrometer to put a firm date on what everyone standing in those pits could already see with their own eyes. That is, in the end, the honest shape of the mystery here. It is not a hidden wall behind a government seal. It is a lake that is larger, colder, and less mapped than most people assume, sitting on top of some of the oldest and strangest rock in North America, worked by human hands for thousands of years before recorded history began in this part of the continent, and still holding roughly 300 shipwrecks that trained searchers with real sonar equipment have not yet located. Into that gap between what is confirmed and what is merely charted, a claim about a walled structure north of Isle Royale dropped more than a decade ago and has never been chased down with the instruments that could settle it. Every geologist who has looked closely at the region can point to a mundane explanation that fits the evidence available. None of them can currently rule the claim out either, because nobody with a research vessel and a multi-beam array has gone to that exact patch of water to check. The gap is not proof of anything hidden. It is proof that Lake Superior still has enough unmapped floor to hold both the ordinary and the extraordinary, and that right now, nobody can tell you with certainty which one is sitting under 500 feet of cold water, 4 miles north of Isle Royale. Somewhere on that same lake, most likely in the next open water season, Jerry Eliason and Ken Merriman will load a boat with a towed side scan unit and go looking for one of the roughly 300 wrecks still unaccounted for. They have spent more than 40 years turning blank stretches of chart into confirmed history, one sonar return at a time, patiently, without cameras rolling and without an institution funding the search, guided mostly by old newspaper accounts, salvage records, and the kind of stubbornness that keeps a person circling the same 12 miles of open water season after season until the lake finally gives something up. It would not take much, by the standard of what they have already done, for a team like theirs, or a university vessel with a multi-beam array like the one that confirmed the drive lanes under Lake Huron, to spend a single clear day running lines over the water north of Isle Royale and produce an answer, one way or the other, to a claim that has sat unresolved since before most of their more recent shipwreck discoveries. Until that day happens, the shape on the old bathymetric chart stays exactly what it has always been, not confirmed, not disproven, just sitting there, 500 feet down, in a lake that has a well-documented habit of keeping what falls into it, whether that is a century-old schooner, a sailor's body, or the true explanation for a shape on a chart, until someone with the right equipment and enough patience finally goes and looks. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.